This is Duke University.
Okay, the title that you have in your program is a little bit different from the title that I changed the paper to. So the new paper is called A Ruckus in the Quiet Room, Coming Out as Envious in a Post-Occupy World. Sorry, I'm having trouble seeing it. All right. I remember the first time I went in a hot tub. I was in the 5th grade, and on a snow day in rural Northwest Oregon, I accompanied the other 5 members of my all-girl Odyssey of the Mind troop to the home of our adult troop leader, who, as small towns have it, also happened to have been my first grade teacher. Marveling at what I perceived to be the finery of Mrs. Chartier's hillside home, in reality, she was merely a middle-class product of the late 80s, when public school teacher was not yet synonymous with monster, and pensions for many were sizable and safe. I relished the feelings of newness as I tiptoed across her cream-colored, stain-free plush carpet toward the sliding glass door, an equally plush towel wrapped around me covertly. I wanted to be the first one in the hot tub, less out of excitement than the hope that a quick slip into the water would keep the others from noticing my tacky teal one-piece bathing suit, worn thin from 2 years' worth of gross skirts and washings. Soon enough, the other girls slipped in next to me, among them Carly, the beautiful blonde daughter of a doctor and nurse, who lived even higher in the hills than Mrs. Chartier. Megan, whose mom worked as an administrator in the superintendent's office, and motor-mouth Jennifer, whose parents both taught at McBride, the grade school on the nicer side of town that these girls were all fortunate to attend. As I sat there quietly, soaking up the glorious heat and the other girls giggling, I was certain this was where I belonged. Among the talented and gifted, girls who talked about band practice, swim meet times, and after-school French classes, girls who, like me, already had college on the brain, destined for a success that would be the inevitable result of our creativity and competitive drive. Before long, the jacuzzi jets punctuating a lull in the giggling, Jennifer offered up some thoughts. "You know what I hate," she began, a conspiratorial smile animating her face. "When poor people complain about being poor. I mean, it's not anyone else's fault you're poor. No one wants to hear it." Despite the 102-degree heat, I suddenly felt a chill. As the other girls snickered amidst a chorus of, "Yeah, me too," I struggled to keep breathing. Had I ever complained around them? At home, I complained all the time. Did they know about that? I convinced my mom to drop me off half a block away from Mrs. Chartier's house so no one would see me getting out of the rusted 76 Datsun my sisters and I called the brown turd. And I've never, under any circumstances, allowed any of them inside my home, the latest in a string of rentals. But right then, I knew the cold truth. I wasn't and would never be one of those girls. Skip ahead 25 years or so. Responding to Republican presidential candidate Mitt Romney's insistence that President Obama is trying to start a class war based on struggling Americans' envy of, quote, those who are most successful, the 1%, Today's Show host Matt Lauer seemed reasonably perplexed. "Yeah, but envy? Are there no fair questions about the distribution of wealth?" Lauer inquired further, without it being seen as envy. Indeed, Romney does agree that there may be such questions. It's fine to talk about these things in quiet rooms, in discussions of tax policy and the like, he explains. But the president, we hear him talking about millionaires and billionaires and executives and Wall Street. It's a very envy-oriented approach, he emphasized, and it will fail. Now, regardless of Romney's failure to acknowledge the Obama administration's own coddling of the millionaires and billionaires and Wall Street executives who have yet to be held accountable for peddling the American homeownership dream to working-class borrowers they knew would never be able to pay back those subprime loans, I nonetheless feel that 5th grade me and Mitt have a couple of important things in common. For one, we are both invested in keeping our class issues quiet, or, to borrow a structure of narrative that I will allow its most rigorous interrogator, Eve Sedgwick, to help me further elucidate, we both express our personal relationship to wealth, or lack thereof, through and within a manifestation of the closet, with Sedgwick calling closetedness, quote, a performance initiated as such by the speech act of silence. Neither Mitt nor 5th grade me, in other words, is willing to stage an earnest public outing of the material and effective significance of wealth in our lives. Both of us, it seems, are convinced that we'd have much to lose if we did that. Second, and of particular political resonance when examined relative to our attachment to quiet rooms, we both justify our class-based silence as an act necessary to counter a certain, to borrow Mitt's expression, politics of envy. Having learned to anticipate the Jennifers of the world, those full of contempt for the complaining poor, I've resolved to keep my envy, my resentment at what Carolyn Steedman has correctly identified as, quote, the social and subjective sense of the impossible unfairness of things, behind the walls of the rental house in which I hid, with only the rest of my family there to absorb the bitterness. However, Mitt's insistence that what he calls envy is proof of the radical fairness of things, proof that the cream has risen and we're all just resentful of our rightfully earned status as skim milk, betrays a desperate fear of what might happen were the fifth grade me's of the world to come out and claim our envy as a collective statement about the impossible unfairness of things. Quote, by allowing this entry into political understanding, Steedman insists, the proper struggles of people in a state of dispossession to gain their inheritance might be seen not as a sordid and mindless greed for things of the marketplace, but attempts to alter a world that has produced in them states of unfulfilled desire. By the end of this discussion, I hope to say something significant about the relationship between these stories, Mitt's and my own, and how the mass coming out impulse behind the Occupy student debt, strike debt, and other expressions of the movement aimed at correcting the unfairness of our generation's student debt loan debt burden could be more effectively utilized were we to deploy more, not less, of Steedman's brand of envy in our fight. When one peruses the Occupy student debt Tumblr site created at the height of last year's Occupy fervor, much of the power of its statement against the shaming, punitive discourse through which the obligation to repay debt is so often approached lies in the horrible repetition of the stories shared there. In many respects, the mere revelation of the numerical values themselves, the principal amount taken out in loans, the interest applied, and the amount, often greater than the principal, still left to pay off following the disastrous effects of compound interest, you can see that up there on the screen, captures this horror well enough. Amidst the manifold accounts of dreams deferred, where the impossibility of buying homes or having children are mentioned time and again as perhaps the most devastating effects of the mortgaged future, the 21st century incarnation of what David Graeber has called the usurer figure rears its hideous head. Sally Mae, the demon with your grandma's name, garnishing paychecks, bullying borrowers into taking out high-interest credit cards to pay off loans, and threatening to, according to many, take me to court and take everything I own in order to extract her pound of flesh from those whose devil's bargain, it seems, involve putting their desire for a particular kind of middle-class success before their wallets. In general, though, one does not see an engagement with the origins of this desire, with desire being the critical link, I would argue, between Sedgwick's closet and Steedman's conception of politicized envy, reflected often enough in these coming-out tales. However, one story I came across, titled Student Debt Slavery, immediately recognizes the importance of charting a genealogical link between desires cultivated early in life and the eventual decision to take on debt to finance a college education. And here's what he had to say. My life is controlled by student loan debt. It started when I was in grade school. The seed was planted in my brain and watered periodically. The seed would eventually grow into a mindset that college was the only way to be successful, and if I didn't go, my life would be miserable. In Landscape for a Good Woman, Steedman links the development of a radical political consciousness explicitly to a conception of envy that she feels has too often been dismissed as a developmental issue particular to childhood. Criticizing Freud and Wilhelm Reich's tendency to classify envy as among the base impulses cultivated in children and the poor, and assumedly overcome with proper maturation into adulthood or middle-class respectability, Steedman instead emphasizes envy's potential as a, quote, usable motivational force in the movement towards socioeconomic justice. A child's envy, she insists, arises from the consciousness of exclusion from, once again, the social and subjective sense of the impossible unfairness of things, with "it's not fair," of course, being one of the battle cries of childhood. Speculated on the extent to which a radical vision and radical analysis may have informed the political and social understandings of working-class residents of Burnley, England, in the late 19th and early 20th century, a community that, being largely under the control of the land-owning gentry, may be of uncanny political interest at a moment when TV-viewing U.S. audiences have developed a peculiar obsession with the upstairs-downstairs Edwardian period drama Downton Abbey, Steedman emphasizes the rhetorical value of radicalism as, quote, allowing the tracing of misery, evil, and unfairness to a political source, that is, to the manipulation by others of rights, privileges, and money. As a poor child in small-town Oregon, I felt a deep, abiding outrage, and certainly a desire to complain over the unfairness of my class situation relative to those enjoying rights, privileges, and money to which I was denied access. However, perhaps like the author of Student Debt Slavery, at some undetectable moment a shame-filled seed was planted in my consciousness. My outrage became, rather, a desire that dare not speak its name. My radical consciousness, the perversion of envy, as the Romneys of the world wish to see this concept defined and disseminated. Of course, the silencing enclosure into which Romney retreats may contain perversions of far too obscene a nature to through the figure of Sedgwick's closet. A place that, however fraught with discrimination and violence as the forces precipitating its existence, has also served as shelter, if more psychic than material, for the powerless. Romney's quiet room is rather a place where power retreats to expand its reach of influence for those with access to its secrets. It might therefore be more usefully envisioned as a boardroom, particularly when viewed as a site of containment for those economist Michael Zweig has identified as the ruling class element of his capitalist top 2%. These rulers, Zweig elaborates, are not merely the corporate elite who offer various forms of strategic managerial direction at the level of individual business ventures, but those who, quote, give strategic direction to the country as a whole. Those corporate directors who sit on multiple boards, thus having an opportunity to coordinate capitalist activity across enterprises. And, he adds, the political elites of the three branches of government and educational leaders who contribute to the furtherance of corporate interests. This ruling class, easily analogous to the 1% or even 0.02%, I would say, could, quote, fit into the seats at Yankee Stadium, capacity 54,000. And you can feel free to envision your favorite Obama administration cabinet member or university president taking up one of these seats if you like. What Romney perhaps didn't account for with his typically out-of-touch Today Show smuggness, however, was the fact that the traditional ideological mechanisms through which the stadium-sized boardroom has remained protected from the masses were breaking down right about the time he started stumping for votes. As one of Sedgwick's included definitions of the closet makes clear, such an enclosure may be small, but it still, quote, belongs to or communicates with the larger, more common spaces precipitating and rarefying its existence. A closet is just a room in a larger house, in other words, and its inhabitants must inevitably answer to those who come knocking. As incredulous as Lauer, but more persistent in his quest to break the boardroom access code, Vanity Fair reporter Nicholas Shaxson responded to Romney's unwillingness to make his tax and investment history a matter of public record by attempting some investigative uncovering of this hidden information, only to discover, of course, that global capitalist legal structures are explicitly designed to prohibit access to such information to all but the owners of the knowledge themselves. Regarding the at least 138 U.S. tax-exempt offshore funds and numerous blind trusts rumored to be hidden by Romney in the Cayman Islands and Bermuda, Shaxson found that there is simply, quote, no way to check the value or sometimes even existence of such accounts. The closet in which many queer and some poor people attempt to claim a modicum of discretion over their self-revelation is, of course, far more permeable than most would care to admit. Despite my best efforts at concealment, many of my most acute childhood traumas centered on moments where my passing mechanisms broke down and I was outed as the poor person that I was, the continual paranoid threat of which only fueled my desperation to do anything to retain a sense of agency regarding the publicization of my true class status. By contrast, you apparently can't out a member of the quiet room if you try. And yet, the political cluelessness with which Romney continued to brandish what he still could not completely contain, not so much the stratospheric status of his net worth, but the egregious unfairness revealed in the distance between his millions and the silence he did break when he contemptuously and anxiously called the mere impulse to question wealth distribution in the U.S. the bitter politics of envy, reveals the pressurizing effects of the post-Occupy public class consciousness raising that registered in both the puzzled look on Lauer's face and Romney's defensiveness. At a time when the polarizing effects of extreme wealth disparity have caused the Matt Lauers and likely even grown-up Jennifers to trace complaints about wealth distribution to a social rather than individualized source, to again quote Steedman, to the manipulation by others of rights, privileges, and money registered by those of radical or radicalizing consciousness, Mitt's private rooms reveal their status as luxury suites in a public house of which the people are owed deed of sale. What Romney's Today Show gap perhaps most crucially demonstrates, and this is a point that I will try to relate back to the student debt crisis that Professor Ross will speak more pointedly on in a moment, is that the time is right for Steedman's conception of politicized envy to supersede the dying embers of the apple pie American ideological standby Romney erroneously turned to for protection when he bitterly called envy a bitter politics, namely the myth of meritocracy. In Twilight of the Elites, Christopher Hayes points out that one of the most insidious features of the rise of the meritocratic ideal has been the way that, under the guise of offering the equal opportunity access to the leadership class denied women and people of color pre-civil rights, meritocracy re-entrenches an essentialized notion of class difference. In other words, since it is assumed, of course erroneously, that we have now overcome race, gender, and sexual discrimination in conferring high achiever status, class difference can therefore only be the result of essential differences in talent, intelligence, and hard work between the deserving haves and undeserving have-nots. From my silent, shame-faced perch in the hot tub in the wake of Jennifer's chastisement of the complaining poor, I had internalized this belief in the meritocratic ideal. Meritocracy was what allowed that seed of self-loathing and working-class effacement to lodge itself in my consciousness and grow. The force precipitating my retreat from justifiable outrage over the unfairness of things into a class closet in which I attempted to muffle my complaints beneath the achievement-oriented mindset also claimed by the author of Student Debt Slavery. This mindset had much to do with my willingness to turn to student loans, absent the capital necessary to pay for school, in the hope of finally being able to claim my rightful place in the, quote, this is Hayes, aristocracy of talent, with my loan burden served as only the latest, most costly instantiation of pantomime belonging. And yet, as much as the shame seed of belief in the rightness of Romney's conception of envy might have kept me filling out FAFSA after FAFSA, underneath this there was, and still is, a deeper sense of outrage over that terrible unfairness. A feeling that, I would argue, every person who has ever gone into debt to finance an education knows, however little entry into consciousness this feeling may be granted. The closet, after all, still has a door that swings both ways. Its power, as Sedgwick puts it, is contained in its sustained and changing mobilizations of closural and disclosural rage, excitement, resistance, pleasure, need, projection, and exclusion. The key, therefore, to granting this rage entry into political understanding in the way that Steedman suggests is to make much more rather than less of the status of envy as an indication of the unfulfilled desire for justice, for the right of people in a state of dispossession to gain their inheritance. This inheritance being the truly public, ideally free access to quality higher education among the many privatized human resources ripe for common reclamation. Thank you.